It's been a busy couple days as far as NASCAR news is concerned. Reports suggest we could see quite a few changes to the 2021 schedule. It might get a little twistier perhaps. And reports suggest Joe Gibbs could become an even more powerful figure in the sport than he already is. I'm here to sift through the good and the bad and the likelihood of all these rumors and reports that we've seen the last couple days. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I told you guys we'd still have plenty to talk about once the off season got here, and sure enough, here we are. Now 2021, I talked about this recently. That is the start of the next generation of NASCAR. They're calling it the next gen car, but it's the next generation for a multitude of reasons. Jimmy Johnson's going to be retiring, which means most of the big familiar household names from this most recent generation that we all grew up watching, they're all retired. Jeff Gordon, Dale Jr., Tony Stewart, Jimmy Johnson, Matt Kenseth, etc., etc., etc. They are no longer racing. We got a lot of new faces, newer faces especially, in the Cup Series by 2021. New car, new schedule changes have been rumored, have been reported. NASCAR for sure is working behind the scenes on trying to bring maybe one, maybe two, maybe just a few new racetracks to the schedule as soon as 2021, and with the merger with ISC, that's become a lot more realistic now. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be changing in 2021. So I know it's still 2019, I know we still have the whole 2020 season to talk about, and that's going to happen and play out and everything, but we're going to talk about in this episode, we're going to talk about 2021 because there's a few new bits of news, new reports out there the last couple days that have a lot of serious implications to 2021 and what's going to happen for the next generation of NASCAR. So let's talk about them. We're going to start with the more fun topic, and then I'm going to spend most of this episode talking about the more serious, more kind of controversial topics. So let's start with the fun one. Adam Stern tweeted yesterday, reported that NASCAR is seriously considering adding street circuits to the 2021 series schedule. Specifically street courses in new markets, as you can see here from the Adam Stern tweet. Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal, always ahead of the game on a lot of these rumors. This is definitely interesting for a number of reasons. Street courses, NASCAR typically don't mix too well. There's the NASCAR Pinty series that often runs some street courses, but that's kind of a smaller scale series. Those cars are very different from the NASCAR Cup Series cars we run today and that we're going to be running next year and probably going forward. But street courses are very common in IndyCar, still very common across American racing series. So the idea of bringing a street course, or more importantly, bringing NASCAR to the streets of a major city that maybe isn't super known for NASCAR racing, that's a very intriguing idea to me. NASCAR's idea of bringing NASCAR to new markets. If you can't bring the new markets to NASCAR, bring NASCAR to the new markets. I've been for this since the very beginning. I'm definitely a firm believer that NASCAR should go out and actively try to engage with new markets that they haven't really engaged with before. I've gotten pushback on this for years since I've been talking about this. People say they need to go back to their roots, that's what got NASCAR in trouble in the first place. I'm not saying you can't go back to your roots and try to appease the fans that helped get you to this point, but the problem is NASCAR's fan base is aging faster than any other professional or any other major sports. That's just a fact. So yeah, still go back to your roots and everything, but don't do that at the expense of expanding into other new markets and trying to get new people interested in the sport and growing like that. That's important too. Because I believe there are plenty of people out there in some of these newer markets that just aren't that familiar with NASCAR, but if they did see NASCAR, maybe watch a race or two, I think there's a good number of them that would definitely be interested in what they're seeing. So NASCAR definitely needs to push themselves into new markets. And like I said, if you can't get the new markets to come to NASCAR, bring NASCAR to the new markets directly. So I'm all for this idea of street courses. The idea though is how realistic is this possibility? Because the Cup Series, it's not known for running street courses. That's not been the Cup Series MO, like ever. I will say one thing that really helps move this along is the fact that NASCAR and ISC, International Speedway Corporation, merged recently. NASCAR now owns ISC, which means NASCAR now owns more than half the tracks the Cup Series races on, which now means, like I've talked about for a while now, NASCAR has more direct control over the schedule, more direct influence over the schedule. If they want to replace one of the Kansas races with a street circuit race in Houston, like IndyCar ran a few years back, they can. NASCAR has the full control to do that. They don't have to consult with anyone. NASCAR owns Kansas. They can scrap Kansas for a week if they want to. Not saying that's what they're going to do. I'm just using that as an example because that's an ISC track. That's my point, is NASCAR has direct control over a lot of tracks. They have direct ownership now over a lot of racetracks, and some of those tracks that have maybe 2 dates a year, I'm sure there's a couple of them that NASCAR is looking at possibly eliminating one of those dates and maybe going back to 1 date a year for those tracks and hopefully bringing a couple new ones in there to fill those places on the schedule. That's where I think this idea of street circuits, street courses come in, because NASCAR's seen the popularity of the Roval. NASCAR fans, at least a lot of NASCAR fans, some of the most vocal NASCAR fans, have been advocating for more road courses on the schedule. I don't think this is as popular of a trend as NASCAR fans think. I think a lot of fans assume everyone wants more road courses. I think it's actually a smaller number than you'd be. I think used to be surprised how few people actually want more road courses in NASCAR. The thing is, the few people that do, I think, are extremely loud about it. That being said, I think most NASCAR fans would at least be open to trying a new road course here or there, mainly due to the success of the Roval. The Roval has been one of the most entertaining races each of the last 2 years. So yeah, bring some new road courses, bring some street circuits. I think a lot of fans are very intrigued by this idea, and I think it's very doable. I think it is very possible. And we're not limited to street circuits here. I think NASCAR fans want more road courses in general. Obviously, NASCAR has a couple other road courses that the Xfinity and Truck Series run on. They could go up to Canadian Tire, Road America, just for example. They could always run one of those, closed courses, actual racetracks, purpose-built racetracks. Or, Tony Stewart and them did just test a NASCAR car at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, another purpose-built road course, Formula One track. So they could always go with one of those, but they could definitely go with a street course as well, and there are some interesting options there. I mean, look at some of the tracks that IndyCar runs. They run St. Petersburg as a street course, Detroit, Long Beach, or Toronto is another interesting one if you, again, want to get Canada involved. That could be important as well. And I mentioned earlier that I'm from Houston, so I'm biased, but IndyCar ran Houston a while back around the NRG Park area. They've run Houston before. That could still be a possibility. That's a major market right there. The only thing I could see hindering the possibility of NASCAR running a street course, especially at one of these major cities like a Toronto or like a Houston, it's just logistics. I think NASCAR is definitely pushing for it, and I think that's what that Adam Stern tweet proves, is that NASCAR is pushing, or is at least interested in a street course in one of these new cities, new markets. But the question is, will it actually prove to be realistic? That will remain to be seen, but it is interesting. I think fans should hopefully be encouraged by the fact that NASCAR is looking to take risks or looking to try new things out. 2021 is the next generation of NASCAR, and NASCAR is taking that claim very, very seriously. They're wanting to do things that we have not seen in the Cup Series really ever. Anyway, so that's kind of the fun rumors, the fun reports at least from this episode. Now let's talk about something a little bit more serious. Let's talk about the car, the race car, the next gen car. NBC Sports published an article a couple days ago that detailed some of more the behind the scenes workings of the next gen car, specifically who's going to be building the new chassis, because NASCAR is going to be moving to kind of a spec chassis system next year where every single team is going to basically be given the exact same chassis from the exact same supplier, similar to how IndyCar does it right now. But anyway, in this article, they interviewed TRD, Toyota Racing Development's David Wilson, who's been often critical about NASCAR's ambitious scheduling, ambitious undertaking of getting the next-gen car ready by 2021. But here's what he had to say about the whole next-gen car, the process, and what it means for NASCAR. I thought this was an interesting quote. He had some very interesting quotes. This is a well-written article, very good article. Talking about the next-gen car, David Wilson said, "We need another year, really, because here's my concern. We can't afford to get this wrong. But the analogy is when NASA's doing a moonshot or rocket launch, that's pretty well thought out, and they're not afraid to pull the date back. What we're doing in a relative sense feels like the same thing. There's going to be more change in a year than this sport has seen in the past 60 years combined. Cumulative. It's a revolutionary change. We as an industry need to get this right." Now, we've talked about on this show before, they've consulted with companies like Dallara, who build the cars and design the cars for IndyCar. IndyCar does this kind of same thing. They run sort of a spec chassis system, similar to what NASCAR is hoping to implement next year. And it's Dallara is the company that works with IndyCar. NASCAR has consulted the same company about helping design the chassis for the Gen 7, or the next gen car. Wow, I slipped into last year on that one. So even though Dallara has been consulted in designing the next gen car, they are not necessarily being considered as the supplier for the actual next gen chassis. NASCAR is apparently accepting bids from several different sources to be the supplier of this chassis for the 2021 and beyond seasons. Now, according to this NBC Sports article, Joe Gibbs Racing is one of apparently 3 bidders that are currently being seriously considered as the supplier for the next gen chassis. And now they don't mention these other companies, so we're going to focus on Joe Gibbs Racing here because that's the only one that they do mention, and that's sure to rile up a lot of fans here. But let's talk about this, because this would be completely new to NASCAR, to have one team or one company, one manufacturer, one supplier supplying a major part of the car. The chassis basically is the car, supplying the cars for the entire series. That is something very new. Now, I'm going to talk about the good, I'm going to talk about the bad about this in just a minute, but here's some more detail. This would be a first for NASCAR, to have one team building the cars basically for every other team in the sport. Joe Gibbs Racing has built chassis for other Toyota teams. Hendrick's built chassis for other Chevy teams. So you've had little versions of this, but until 2021 at least, we have not seen one team building the cars for the entire 40-car field. Now, a lot of people, when they hear that Joe Gibbs Racing is going to be the ones building the chassis for everyone, they worry about a conflict of interest because Joe Gibbs Racing runs Joe Gibbs Racing, one of the competitors, one of the teams. If Joe Gibbs Racing is in charge of everyone's car, who's to say they're not going to give their own team the best stuff and quietly give everyone else worse stuff? There's a conflict of interest there. NASCAR President Steve Phelps did address this issue, at least somewhat, in a press conference the other day. He did say, in fact, that if a current competing organization were selected to build the chassis for the entire sport in 2021, the company that was actually supplying, the division that was actually supplying the chassis would have to separate itself significantly from the organization. So while it would still be under the Joe Gibbs umbrella if this happens, Steve Phelps and NASCAR would definitely be keeping a close eye on making sure that they are kept very separate from the race team. There's Joe Gibbs Racing, the race team that's competing each week, and then Joe Gibbs suppliers, manufacturing, I don't know, who's building the chassis, that would need to be kept completely separate. So NASCAR, at least it sounds like, would be focused on this, would be looking at this. They'd be keeping an eye on this type of thing, which doesn't put all my concerns to rest, of course, but it definitely is noteworthy that they would be paying attention to that. They wouldn't just let everything slide. Now, before I talk a little bit about the good and the bad, I'd say, of the spec chassis and maybe Joe Gibbs Racing building the chassis, before I talk about the good and the bad of this rumor, of this report, I want to leave with this quote from David Wilson. Again, here's another thing the TRD executive had to say. "We all know there are teams on the precipice of failing, so there is a lot of pressure. We appreciate and respect that there are parts of our sport that are in trouble. The team ownership model is nuts, so it's not that we shouldn't be attempting the next gen in 2021, but we just need to get it right. If we can't make that target in 21, we need to be prepared with a contingency plan." Strong but honest words there from, TRD, Toyota Racing Development, one of the groups that's spending a lot of money in NASCAR these days. So anyway, let's talk about the cons and the pros of this whole idea of spec chassis, and especially if a race team like Joe Gibbs Racing is the one supplying it for everyone. We'll start with the cons, because I know NASCAR fans, they always like to start with the cons on pretty much everything. So let's start with, in my opinion, the negatives of this story. Number one, the con to adding spec parts in NASCAR is that it would take away some of the competition aspect from the race teams. Teams have their own engineers, own manufacturers, own people, own developers, own R&D guys that pride themselves in building chassis, building race cars that are better than their competitors. If everyone's getting the exact same chassis, that takes an element of the competition away. Yeah, it's a behind-the-scenes element that doesn't get talked about that much on Sunday, but it is an element of competition that would be taken away. Number two, I believe it's very risky for NASCAR to kind of be putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. If you have one company, one supplier that's building all the race cars for your entire series, what happens if something goes wrong with that company? Say they go out of business, say they have an issue with one of the developments, maybe there's a development flaw in their race cars. What happens if they make a mistake or something goes wrong with this supplier? It's going to affect your entire series. You don't have a backup plan. Kind of like David Wilson was saying there's no contingency plan in place if this team, if the one supplier messes up. So if Joe Gibbs Racing in this case, or Dallara, whoever makes a mistake or has something go wrong or goes out of business, what happens to the 40 car fields that you're supposed to see every Sunday? There's no backup plan in place. So having all your eggs in one basket like that can be very risky. Anyway, those are the cons, I would say. Then there are some pros, in my opinion, to NASCAR adding spec parts by 2021. Number one, first and foremost, it would save teams money. Big teams, small teams, everyone would save a little bit of money if this were to be put into place. Mainly because the large teams would no longer be trying to outspend each other to stay on top of the sport. They wouldn't be all investing millions and millions of dollars on trying to build better and better chassis to stay ahead of each other. If everyone's getting the exact same thing, you're not going to be able to outspend each other. Obviously, they'll spend money in other ways too, but the chassis is a very important, very expensive part of the car that they will no longer be trying to outspend each other on. So I guarantee you it will save the race teams a little bit of money. How much specifically, I'm not sure, but it will save them some money. And as we heard from David Wilson a minute ago, there are a lot of teams, big teams and small teams, that are on the cusp of failing. Small teams especially, but the big teams are not invincible to this as well. The Joe Gibbses, the Hendrick Motorsports, they are not doing great right now either. So saving money is very important to these teams, and it's very important if NASCAR is going to survive and be sustainable long term. My second pro, I would say, is from a competition standpoint, this is going to help even the competition a little bit more, because now small teams like Go Fast Racing, Levi Family Racing, Richard Petty Motorsports are going to be given the exact same chassis, the exact same car, base car, that Joe Gibbs, Team Penske, Hendrick are getting. So that's going to help even the competition a little bit. Obviously, Joe Gibbs, Penske, and them, they're going to have advantages in other aspects. They're going to spend more money elsewhere. They're still going to have some advantages over the smaller teams. But this is a major part of the race car, a major part of the competition that will now be equal. And that will be now on a more even playing field. And I think that's good for competition. We want to see more competitive teams in NASCAR. We don't want to see just the couple of teams that spend the most money dominate each week. We want to see the little guys have opportunity as well. We want the focus to still be on the drivers. There's no real debate. Kyle Busch is probably the best driver in NASCAR. Most people say he's arguably the most talented. He's also driving probably the best car on most weeks. But for years, we always say, man, what if Matt DiBenedetto was in better equipment? What if Larson was in better equipment? What if Corey LaJoie was in better equipment? Well, now, if the cars are a little more equal, we kind of get to see that now. We get to see how much better Kyle Busch really is than some of these other guys. Or maybe he's not as good. Maybe he's not as much better as we thought he was. Now we get to see more, as far as we get to see it more in the drivers' hands. We get to see which drivers really are better than which drivers, how they stack up against each other if the field is a little bit more even. Obviously, even with just a spec chassis, is not going to be a perfectly even playing field, not even close, but it will be closer than it's been in years past. So those are my pros. Saves money, competition becomes a little more even. The cons, obviously, a lot of risk there, putting all your eggs in one basket. And it does take away an important behind-the-scenes aspect of competition that a lot of fans, I think, enjoy rooting for. A lot of fans like rooting for Ford versus Chevy versus Toyota. Granted, now they still will be making their own engines, which is another very crucial part of the race car. So they're still going to be making their own engines. There still will be that kind of uniqueness to each manufacturer. They're all going to have their own body style and everything. So there's still going to be uniquities between the manufacturers, but one big one was building the chassis. That would be gone. So there's cons, there's pros to this. I would say one thing kind of in the middle that's a pro and a con, depending on how you look at it, is I think if NASCAR goes to more spec parts in the future, the focus will be shifted more onto the drivers and less on the race teams, the manufacturers, the engineers, all those types of people. So depending on how you feel about that, I know I personally watch NASCAR more for the drivers than for the behind-the-scenes stuff, but a lot of people do like the behind-the-scenes stuff. So depending on how you look at it, this idea of adding spec parts definitely eliminates the importance of behind-the-scenes people more and puts more of the emphasis on the drivers. So depends on how you look at that. I think more people watch NASCAR for the drivers, which is why I'm overall okay with this idea. But I do think that that is an important thing that you're losing out there and that not everyone's going to be happy about. That's what I do on this show. I talk about NASCAR news, I talk about reports, I talk about rumors. I try to look at both the pros and the cons, look at it from both angles, because I don't think anyone ever makes any decisions in NASCAR just because they want to screw everyone. Nobody's making decisions because they want to destroy the sport, because they want to destroy racing, because they want to make people angry. Pretty much every decision that is made has some pros to it. There's a reason that someone is doing that, and they usually think that reason is going to make something better. So I always try to see every side of every argument. That's what I've always done on this show, and feel free to agree with me, disagree with me. You can agree with or disagree with NASCAR's decision making in this case, but NASCAR is definitely in kind of an unprecedented and unique situation here. Teams are not doing great. Sport itself is not as great as it once was, is not as profitable as it once was, and some major changes have to be made. Anyway, y'all, thank you for watching this episode. Remember, you can follow me on Instagram, you can follow me on Twitter. Big thank you, of course, to my Patreon supporters: Mike Waffles, Michael Harrison, at Jews and the Stars, Cameron James, John Comas, Jason R. Long, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, TheRacingInsiders.com, Matthew Kulopoulos, Pepe Lucius, Jeremy Conklin, Emilio Garcia, Joey DiMaccino, Sky Racing Forum, Bryce Schumacher, Bryce Starcher, Scott McNew, Cole Austin, Bradley Pelletier, and the rest of these incredible Patreon supporters. I couldn't do this show each week without the support I get from every single one of you, so thank you for continuing to support Out of the Group. We're almost to 100,000 subscribers, y'all. Needless to say, I couldn't do this without support from you guys and from everyone who's watching at home. Really incredible. I have a couple more kind of year in review episodes planned for the next few days, so hope you guys are looking forward to those. But until then, have a very happy Thanksgiving. I will see you all again very, very soon. Thank you for watching.